9:30, and we're going to go ahead and call this symposium to order and get going. I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us online. It's not necessarily our preferred method of conducting the symposium, but under the current conditions, that's the best option available. And so we appreciate you taking the time to be part of it. I think we've got a great program outlined for today, and I hope that you'll find value in what our speakers have to say. My name's Scott Jensen. I am the University of Idaho Extension educator in Owyhee County, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the symposium. My colleague, Dr. Benton Glaze, Extension Beef Cattle Specialist from Twin Falls, is the other co-host, and then co-chair of the symposium. And then we've got a good list of colleagues and agency folks that help in the planning, and all of those individuals, just want to point out, are listed in the proceedings. I do want to just give you a couple of things to be aware of. One, I put a link to the proceedings in the chat, and so feel free to click on that and download it. You'll find some information on our speakers, as well as some abstracts and some of the key points of what they're going to present today. We do have some credits available, and so if you are interested in continuing ed credit, you need to send me an email, scottj@uidaho.edu, and I will get you the paperwork for that. If you're interested in ARPA's credit, then please email Benton Glaze, and he'll be happy to help you with that. Throughout the symposium today, we're going to handle questions through the chat. And so as our speakers are presenting, if you have a question, something additional you'd like to know, please put it in the chat, and then we will be happy to relay that question and ask it. During the breaks and during lunch, we're going to show some of the Life on the Range videos. We've got some excellent videos that have been made over the last couple of years, all supported and kind of, I don't know what the term is, kind of outlined, supported, and all that through the Idaho Rangeland Resource Commission. And then Steve Stubner and his crew that put those together and just do a fabulous job. And then lastly, we will have an evaluation today towards at some point. Dr. Glaze will put that in the chat, and then we'll also email it out to you afterwards. We definitely would like to hear your thoughts on today's program, and so we look forward to that. But with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. I'll stop there and then go ahead and introduce Dennis. So Dennis Metzger is our first speaker. He's got a strong seed stock background and has incorporated with that a lot of knowledge and experience in the feeder cattle sector. He's a livestock representative for Superior Livestock and has 20 plus years experience in feeder cattle procurement. He promotes the use of value-added genetics to improve cattle operations and has been part of Superior Sunrise, which is an educational program that allows viewers to learn more about superior livestock in the cattle market. And he provides a lot of current information about the livestock industry. And in visiting with him yesterday afternoon, he was even had some more current data to update his presentation from very recent sales. And so we're looking forward to hearing from him. And with that, Dennis, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll get this thing started.
Well, thank you, Scott. Certainly my privilege and pleasure to be a part of your symposium here for 2021. Like you, Scott, not my preferred way, but what we found at Superior over the past year, we've had to adjust and adapt to a new way of marketing cattle. Not so much our venues changed in the way we do it, but how we went about it, and maybe our locations changed a little bit. So anyway, it's my privilege to be here. I appreciate Danielle and Scott and Benton for walking me through some of this, and I'll apologize up front if we're not able, and we might already have one of those hiccups here. I'll try to find my IT person. Might have just abandoned me, but we'll see what happens here. There we go. I want to make this more about what we see that adds value to cattle, that it's going to have a superior venue to it. Most of the information I'll share with you over the next hopefully hour here, and I hope we have questions when we get to a certain point. But the data that I'll show with you is fresh. It was compiled since the end of the year, was presented to us yesterday here in Oklahoma City at our bell ringer auction meetings for all Superior reps. It's always been my take on things. You know, I've got a seed stock background with a commercial twist to it, and that's turned primarily to commercial marketing anymore with the assistance of genetics. And we oftentimes do everything right in the production part of it, from great genetics to vaccination programs to value added programs, and maybe don't put as much emphasis on the final marketing of that product. And hopefully when we get done here, we'll bring more awareness to various options, and all these things combined can potentially add value to the cattle. And like I said earlier, I certainly don't want to make it an advertising for Superior, but most of this comes from Superior. We sell 1,400,000 head of cattle last year, which was up from 2019. So in a challenging year, we find that to be rewarding, and we appreciate everybody's support of the program. I want to focus primarily on genetics, vaccination programs, value-added programs in terms of NHTC, agent source, and those kind of things. And I think here, if I get my screen to work, I'm not sure why this isn't. There we go. This was information presented to us yesterday and this is Merck-related information here. And most of the data that you'll see here today is either Merck, IMI primarily, and then Superior data. Keep in mind as we go through this, most of this is based off of a VAC 24, which Superior is the ones that started the VAC programs. Value added part of it almost 30 some years ago at this point. But this here was presented to us yesterday, and that's the amount of lots and total number of cattle with an average of 577 pounds. I'm going to give you two scenarios. This will be on calves or weaned calves, and then we'll get into some yearlings and show you what the differences are. But all these things combined together with vaccinations and genetics add up to some pretty significant premiums, which adds up to a lot of dollars per head over, 1 or 2 or 3 loads of cattle. And all these, in my mind, fit about any class of cattle and any size of operation. It doesn't have to be a 10 load operation to add value to these things, in my opinion. But we'll start off here. This is here more about breeds, primarily the base is English, which would be your Angus or your Hereford cross. And they throw the Brahman and the exotic part of it into it, exotics being your Charolais or your Sim Angus. And we had a discussion yesterday about in the future breaking those away from the eared cattle, because we think that's distorted a little bit because of Brahmin influence there, particularly in the area where most of you are listening from. So you can see how strong the English based product has been here in our analysis. I'm not here to tell you which breeds are better. I'm just here to show you what has value. It has accelerated value probably in the feeder cattle world right now. Of course, obviously, there has been what we think is a significant spread between steers and heifers, and that spread continues to grow. Although here on our average, I think that's probably more conservative than a lot of what most of us might see at a local auction or even on the video. I mean, those spreads are getting bigger between the steers and heifers, and if we have enough time, that's probably a discussion that we could have about how to maybe mitigate some of that with different management of, maybe weaning the heifers or changing the marketing time of them or changing the weight of them or how we market them. The one thing for sure right now in any business, but in our business that we're talking about today, it seems like we've got to make some changes to the traditional way. Is maybe not going to realize us the most dollars at the end of the day. So steer heifer ratio spread is obviously a concern for any of us. That also ties back to genetics. If you're terminal sires, why it probably narrows a little bit, in my opinion, and from what we see. When we talk about vaccination programs, everything's based on what we call VAC24, and all these VAC programs are available on our website. I won't go into each description of each one, but VAC24 would be the baseline for about anything we're going to talk about today. There's a significant advantage once you get past a VAC24. VAC24 basically is one round of shots at branding time, preferably a modified live, your 8-way, your clostridials. We see less and less of those cattle all the time, and you can see on the screen hopefully why that is the case. VAC34 would be your next step. That's a round of shots in the spring, a round of shots minimum of 3 weeks prior to delivery, selling a calf off the cow. They're unweaned cattle, but you see a significant jump when you give that second round of shots. I know it's particular areas, it has some challenges to it to get them conquered, to get that second round of shots in them, but there's probably ways, to manage around that. We're always rotating pastures, and buyers now are telling us, and I tend to think this is more the case, that, if you're given a preconditioning shot, if you will, on the VAC34, 6 weeks out, it still has as much potency to it. And buyers probably prefer 3 weeks to 6 weeks more than they prefer 2 weeks when they're purchasing cattle. So, I would encourage, if we're in a rotational part of it, if you're 4 or 5 weeks and you're moving past a set of corrals, it is appropriate from a buyer standpoint to put a second round of shots in them then. But as you can see, if you're in a position where you can wean those cattle, then there's even more value. And these are based on price per head. But so oftentimes I'll hear that weaning them, you're not getting paid for it. Well, I think maybe we've got proof that there is value in weaning them. A VAC45 is simply a minimum of 45-day wean on any of the calves in the lot. So the last one wean has to be 45 if you've weaned them at 2 different time frames. As long as the last one weaned was a minimum of 45 days. So you're looking at $45 head premium. Keep in mind, these are averages. So some could be more, some could be less. And then we go to what is a new program at Superior, just a little over a year old, called VAC60. It's been my feedback from most of the buyers that I work with that there's a significant advantage as a buyer between 45 days and 60 days on health issues, a lot less pulls on a back 60. That 2 weeks seems to make a big difference in the health of those cattle. So we see about a $2 and almost 50-cent premium for that extra 2 weeks. Then if we want to get into a bigger premium is what we call back pre-con cattle, which are cattle that are 60, 90 days weaned, backgrounded, third round of shots, third round of modified live, and the previous two categories also was 3 rounds. But I think those will, and most of this might be familiar territory to a lot of you, but these are current figures based on all of 2020. If there's been good that's come out of COVID for our industry, the trend over the last several years has been towards identified cattle, consumers wanting to know where the product comes from, where it was raised, even how it was raised a lot of times. But COVID's probably expedited that situation. I mean, most of us are aware of how hard it is to get one into our smaller local harvest facilities, a beef or two at a time. Locker beef, we're a year out a lot of places, and I hear that all over the country. And I ship cattle in about a 15-state area, so I don't have a particular region where that's more prevalent than others. So with COVID kind of expediting some of these things, most of us are aware of NHTC cattle, which is non-hormone treated cattle. That means they've never had an implant. You can still feed Bovatec or Rominson to those cattle, and they qualify for the program. The other part of NHTC is its mandatory electronic tag, EID button we call them, to require for non-hormone treated cattle. Most of those cattle are export, but there's been domestic markets now that have realized big NHTC premiums. These are based on, as we said earlier, on about a 575-pound calf, and you're looking at a $3.30 premium per hundredweight. Keep in mind that's the average. I would say most of the cattle that Matt Thompson, who's from Idaho, and I handle in your area that are NHTC or better, probably are significantly higher than that. I'm going to say they're, $8 to $10 premium on cattle we're selling on the video with an NHTC qualification.
Well then, Dennis, if I could break in for a second, the question I would have there is, do you think that premium is sufficient to cover, whatever you might give up in production from use of whatever growth hormone?
That's a ongoing conversation that's been discussed many times. In my opinion, yes, and this is strictly my opinion, but most implants are given at branding time on a cow-calf operation. You're given that implant to a calf that's 40 to 50, maybe 60 days old. Implants, for my feeble knowledge, need energy of some kind to whether that's grass production or an energy ration to have the most effect. By the time that calf, in my opinion, is old enough to utilize forage, the life of that implant's probably on the downhill way, in my opinion. So yeah, I think I think with genetics, the genetics that we have now, and you can pick any flavor, but genetically we've made these cattle tremendously better through science and genetic or breeding better cattle. I don't think you're realizing enough of an advantage in that calf to implanting. I don't think you're going to get enough return. Implants are cheap, I realize, but by the time that calf's old enough to utilize it, I don't think you've got enough life left in the implant to make a big difference. I've had several of my customers over the years, particularly 10, 12 years ago when I first, encouraged them probably not to implant. And I don't know if I have the slide in here, but I could show you a slide that they presented to us yesterday. And I think it was 85 or 90 cents, if I remember right, premium for non-implanted, non-programmed cattle that weren't in a program. So bring, almost $1 on a 600 pounder, well, that's $6. Because they are more buyer friendly, probably because they think that the goodie is still in those cattle, so to speak, the performance. So to answer your question, Scott, yeah, I do think if we've done our genetics right, we manage our water right, manage our feed right, I don't think you're going to realize any less performance.
Perfect.
And all these things, we take all these programs and they all add extra value the more icons, if you want, or the more ribbons we put with them. So as what's in front of the screen now is what we call superior progressive genetics. Those are seed stock programs that we work with here at Superior that get extra emphasis put on their genetics, and they help promote their customers' calves. There's a list of those on the website, but so Superior Progressive Genetics in 2020 had $1.27 per hundred weight advantage. So those cattle that you see on TV selling that had an SPG with them, which is purebred seed stock operations that Superior works with, realized $1.27 per hundred weight more. So that kind of gives you some idea on an upper 5 weight cattle calf what those programs added to the value on the average on whatever it was. I can't remember, 800 some thousand head. So in some other things that we've started BQA. I didn't put the slide in here, but they said yesterday that there was I don't remember what it was, 30-40 cent premium for BQA. It's a simple thing to you can actually do it online now. So we put a BQA icon on there. Primarily what's driving that is consumers and packing plants. Tyson, for instance, pretty much has to be, all their cattle have to come out of BQA certified lots where all the crew's been through a BQA certification. It's locally, you have veterinarians giving those classes, probably some drug companies, pharmaceutical companies have probably participated in it. My thought on it is, I think buyers like it because they know that somebody has been through some kind of education. And it's probably not so much in my mind about injection sites, but it's probably more about handling of the product, not letting it lay on the dash of the pickup before you're going to use it, and the way that product's managed. Simple little thing that I think probably helps all of us, and we probably ought to go through a refresher course every once in a while. So.
Yeah, and since you mentioned that, I'll put in a plug for it because in Idaho, it's mainly handled through the extensions where we do the trainings and certifications, and definitely, I mean, even there's some data out of Colorado State from a year or so ago that shows a financial benefit to being BQA certified. And so, aside from it's the right thing to do, it can be, add a little value just like some of these other programs.
Well, I think everything's, in my mind, Scott, it's the more effort that we put into making a better product, it's probably going to, have even more consumer friendliness in today's world. And we're always under the scrutiny of the other side that we've got to combat. And any of these things that we can take on as producers, I think can reward us not only financially, but like Scott said, it is the right thing to do. And I think Wright's probably got more public viewing now than it maybe even had a few years ago. I mean, we're going to have to make constant changes, and some of them don't cost a lot of money to do, to make our awareness friendly to a consumer. I mean, beef consumption's in a good spot right now. You know, as a part of what's happened in 2020 has created that. And if we can build on that, and, you know, obviously getting things open back up is probably even going to enhance that. That's a discussion for later in the day and somewhere else. But anyhow, the things we just went through on a 5-weight calf, here's what they look like when you make them a yearling or an 8-weight backgrounded calf. And this is based on an 800-pounder. There was 4,000 lots, you know, close to 500,000 head of cattle in this analogy here. So, and I don't know, the mean on the calf while ago was, the average for last year was $1.52, whatever it was, 19. That was down a little from the previous year. Your 800-pounder has an average of $1.32.19. That'd be basically a commodity steer without a lot of extra bells and whistles. So with that said, we can go through some of the same things that we went through a while ago in the calf. That's what it looks like when they're non-English, you know, whether they're Brahman or exotic or continental. By no means do I think this means you don't use a Charolais bull or a Sim Angus bull or whatever other flavor. Like I said, I'm not here to tell you which flavor of cattle we see. You know, we see which ones are probably the most rewarding in a sale, especially once you put programs to them. But, you know, if programs don't fit your operation, this is probably in my mind, probably where you can make up some ground in terms of dollars per head at the end of the day. I mean, the one thing that we'll all agree on probably is heterosis is about the only free thing we've got. But there again, then that's based on the right genetics. So this is what it looks like on an 8-weight on the implant that we talked about a while ago. Implants are more significant in this class of cattle. If you're backgrounding cattle and you have no desire to make them natural or NHTC, I think implants are something that probably has value. You can get too carried away in the implant regiment. You know, we'll see some cattle or know of some cattle that probably don't get represented quite right. But the more implants you start putting in one of those when you own them, the less value they're going to have. Even if you don't share that information, Matt and I we're going to drill it out of you. If we're selling 8-weights, we're going to ask how many implants they've had. Just because what happens if you've pushed one of these and made them pretty flushy, condition's still important to these buyers. They want to feel like there's still good left in the cattle when they land at their place. We sell a set of cattle that's had a couple of implants and they're pretty flushy. We're probably going to have to find a new buyer the next year. And that's one thing that Matt and I focus on a lot is longevity, because there seems to be getting less buyers every year. So we want them happy and we want them to come back. We don't want to give them the ranch to get them to come back, but these things that we can do to add value to them that can reward us at the end of the day is, we think, important in the marketing process. So here again, here's the slide I was telling you about a while ago on BQA. I wasn't too far off. For whatever reason, I just had it green and not red. For whatever reason, this one had a negative outcome. in our analogy, and I'm not sure why that is, and they couldn't explain that to us yesterday. I'm going to put a plug in for Scott, though. I'm still going to encourage you to be a part of the program because I think it's important. And as a representative and also a producer that cares about my product, I want to know that I'm presenting and offering and delivering the right product. And it don't matter what your marketing venue is. You know, some of us are, you know, we're set to, you know, we don't have any choice but go to an auction market because of size or our management conditions or whatever. I still think these things are important. We probably don't maybe get as much recognition or as much value out of them through an auction barn. But if and all of these programs, in my mind, probably realize the most potential in a national setting, you know, where you're going to present them to a competitive bidding system from many different areas. So one that you hear a lot about and one that's becoming more and more important, and COVID's been a driver in this too, the GAP program, which stands for Global Animal Partnership. Quite frankly, it's probably not something that I would have endorsed when it first come out 15 years ago, although I was early in the when it come out to get on board with it because we could see some value, and that value's continued to grow and is probably going to continue to grow even more. Those cattle have to be verified natural, which means no implants, no antibiotics ever. I mean, a calf scour pill knocks them out of an all natural. There's significant premiums in those cattle. And I'll go back to the question Scott asked a while ago. In the programs that I've got on GAP cattle, we haven't seen, I've got one that's right there based right in Idaho, not too far from where, well, between Idaho and Dillon, I guess, Du Bois. They do a lot of implanted cattle. We'll sell a couple thousand implanted cattle, and we'll sell a couple thousand program cattle. And we base them all the same weight at the end point for September delivery. So we're not seeing much loss of performance in that particular operation. All 100% English black-hided cattle. So this is what you're looking at for a premium on an 8 weight. We can all do the math for 100 weight. That's a pretty significant premium if you're maintaining your performance. Most of these things that we do for these programs, anyhow, we're already doing them. So we might as well go ahead and verify them and get paid for it. I mean, most of us are taking good care of our cattle. We're using the right genetics. We're managing our feed resources right. And so if we can spend a little $4 or $5 a head to put some of these programs to them and add value to them, I think we're leaving some money if we doing everything and we don't take advantage of them. $9.23%, 23 cents gap premium on an 8 weight.
So we had, sorry, we had a question that was just fits right in there related. Can you add something like GMO free to gap and then add on to that premium?
You know, GMO is, you can add lots of, you know, the basic one is NHTC. Where your value really starts to accelerate is when you combine, and remember that agent source is a requirement for NHTC. Where the premium really comes is when you've got an NHTC, verified natural, and gap. Most of those cattle are going to fit a GMO certification too. We don't have any data on the GMO, even though we sell quite a few of them. It's usually attached on with a NHTC, a gap audit to begin with. There's also a grass-fed one. We probably see a little more interest in grass-fed than we do in GMO, in my opinion. I think in my career, I've marketed one set of cattle that they bought them as GMO cattle, even though they qualified for the rest of them. What a buyer prefers is he prefers the natural, the gap, and the NHTC. And the reason for that is if they happen to have to be treated once they get to their next stop, then they fall out of a natural or a gap classification. They fall back to an NHTC because if you remember, an NHTC can have an antibiotic. You just can't have a hormone. And on that subject, on your heifer side of things, if you're AI, and keep in mind, I just drew a blank, but when you're synchronizing, that's a hormone. So, you know, and if you're going to do the natural gap deal, identify those cattle either by an ear notch, a secondary tag, some form of identifiable identification. If those cattle fall out of that, you still got, they can fit into your NHTC side of it. They just can't go on a set of cattle that's natural or gap. So to answer your question, Scott, yes, GMO. Most of these programs that qualify for gap, verified natural, and that's a feed thing more than anything. You got to verify your feed products to qualify for that. It don't cost any extra. You might as well put it there if you're doing the full gamut for programs. You see one on here now that's Natural Plus. Natural Plus also fits gap because gap cattle are natural, but Natural Plus simply means that a producer is willing to sign any affidavit that a buyer will need when they get ready to harvest those cattle, which say like Meyer, Tyson, Five Rivers. Unfortunately, they all have a different affidavit, so we spend more time signing and filling out affidavits at delivery time than we do sorting cattle, but there is value there, nearly $4 a hundred. That answer your question, Scott?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Just, we work closely with IMI here at Superior. There's multiple verification companies. IMI would be probably the predominant one, but you've got Ranchers Connecting Ranchers, you've got Angus Link. There's several of them out there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. All this is available on the internet of places, but IMI does agent source verification. They do verified natural. This is all third party. It's all got a cost. Going to run in the neighborhood of $750 to maybe $1,000 per ranch. What I would like to share with you, especially in the area that we're focused on today, is you can include multiple locations under one audit. So if you've got summer country that you're in charge of management wise, you don't have to do each individual ranch as long as it's all under the same management and same ownership. I do have a couple clients that are separate entities, but they commingle their cattle together and they market them together, and they basically use the same genetics, same vaccination programs. And like I said, they're commingling those cattle at some point in the stage of that calf's life. So we're combining a couple of those ranches in situations where we can get them all under one audit, so we don't have to do each audit separate. Or IMI's doing this. We're not doing it. We're just facilitating it. You're looking at an EID button that's probably going to run you somewhere between $3 and $3.50. That's a electronic button. We've kind of went away from dangle tags because of they're too cumbersome to enter into a system. You know, a tag, just point a wand at it, and you've got it in your computer. In HTC, we've primarily talked about the verified natural beef thing, no hormones, no antibiotics, no ionophores, no animal byproducts. Pretty simple. If your cattle qualify for that, it's not going to cost you a lot more to put a verified natural on them and an NHTC. And then if that's where your value comes from. If your cattle qualify for that, that's where your extra value is at. GAP is not mentioned there, but GAP, there's a whole long list of rules for GAP, and they're pretty cumbersome. And that program was written by a guy in Washington that's probably not on our side of the fence when it comes to a lot of things, but most of the GAP cattle, their ending point is through Amazon. Now, Whole Foods is where most of that product winds up. Demand seems to be growing. Real briefly, here's a new program that was launched about a year ago. Probably a lot of us feel like maybe the trend's more towards this program at some point in time. We were told yesterday that there's 3 majors on board with this program now, which is Prime Pursuits, Walmart, for those of you that are not aware of who Prime Pursuits is. Tyson's on board with it, and 5 Rivers. 3 pretty powerful, large operations that are all on the beef care program now. We tend to think, or I tend to think maybe that we're going to see this program accelerate. This program's designed for any type of cattle. They can be implanted cattle. They can be, they're going to have to be done before they're purchased, but it'll fit every class of cattle, every flavor of cattle. Like Tyson's deal or 5 Rivers' deal, to qualify there, they got to be at least 50% English to continue on through their Aspen program, which is their ending point. It was just launched a year ago this month, a year ago this week. There's the numbers on what their first year did. I think that's pretty phenomenal for a program that's just taken off. I told you earlier we work a lot with IMI. These are some premiums on an average. Keep in mind this is calves, wean cattle, yearlings, and there's a lot of cattle that are in this number. This is from 2018 to 2020, just agent source. That premium is starting to dwindle if they're just agent source, but it's still a start towards added value. You had the NHTC cattle in there, and this is where some of these programs have value, is particularly when we get to the heifers. If we're trying to keep that spread narrow, this is some of the things we can do to make those heifers more valuable. I don't need to go through all those numbers with you. They're pretty self-explanatory. Just keep in mind they're based over every class of cattle. Now, we have seen bigger premiums, particularly in the NHTC and the verified natural. At like the cattle that Matt and I handled, those numbers are going to be drastically bigger for you. That's kind of the end of some of those value-added programs and their value. I hope there's more questions there. We got, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes left. Looks like 20.
Oh, we got just a few minutes left.
Oh, well, I never could tell time very well, especially when I charge by the hour.
Oh, yeah. Well, we do have a couple of questions that have come through. And so one of them, hopefully, reading this all right, but when you go back to some of the discounts for the, looking at English versus whether it's exotic or whatever else, all of those discounts, I guess, are for those live animals at that weight. But the question is, what's the difference at the fed market on the rail? And can you think continental breeds can make up, in that when you're hanging them on the rail versus live animal?
And I'm not sure I know how the question's directed. If you're talking quality grade, yield, or if the Continental cattle qualify. This is my personal opinion, and I've got more of a Continental ancestry than I do English. But my paycheck comes from primarily English. So what we see, or what I see personally, and I don't have numbers to back this up, I'm going to give you my personal experiences, like a Char cross or a Sim cross that is NHTC, verified natural, and even GAP. They're not going to bring us much per pound at the end of the day. Typically, they're going to be right there dollars per head wise. The Angus English thing is out of control. I mean, that's where the value is right now. I mean, you got Walmart, buying a couple 100,000 of them a year. Five Rivers. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. The Continental cross fit into probably your smaller feeders that aren't maybe selling to one of those bigger outfits, because you are going to get some extra performance out of those cattle. Just simply heterosis. I don't know if I'm answering your question right, Scott. Quality grade wise, yield wise, I mean, we're pretty much all aware that Continental cross is probably going to out yield an English cross and probably going to have less 4s and 5s. Those things are all things that we design our genetics for and so genetic selection for. But I would encourage you to keep in mind, even if we're focusing towards this value added program, the one thing that we don't measure on the seed stock side of things is adaptability to your environment. And probably one of the best cowmen that I have the most respect for, he's deceased now, but he always encouraged and said that he builds a female to fit his environment. He can change the rest of it through his bull side of it. I'm not here to get into that conversation, but genetics the science that we have available now, it can alleviate a lot of the things that we spent 10 years trying to figure out over the past. I mean, science is a wonderful thing. Does that mean we put our whole hand into the pot when we're doing that? No. I mean, you gotta use all these things with common sense, in my opinion. These are programs that probably fit most operations, whether and if we can implement them. Most of these programs require a video type venue to market them. We're seeing more and more auction barns that are NHTC and verified natural qualified. GAP, there's no way it can ever go through an auction barn. It's got to be ranch direct. That just because of the way there's about a 5-page list of rules for GAP. Most of us are doing those things anyhow, but it's pretty cumbersome.
Sure. And we had a question come into, do you know if Beef Northwest is participating in the IMI care program?
Not at this point. They've been talked to, my understanding, by IMI personnel, but I'm not aware of it at this point. Huge GAP program and natural program, but that's out of my wheelhouse. I'm not an IMI personnel, but it was mentioned, not necessarily in a meeting, but in an iced tea setting that they've been talked to. So
sure. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate you sharing this information with us. It's really interesting to be able to look at some of those things and where, definitely gives a guy, some things to look at and think about as far as where and how to potentially add value to an individual producer and ranch. And so I think it's great to be able to look at that information. So
I appreciate the opportunity. I'll close in saying, Scott, that we've had the perception for several years that we think we're going to flood this value-added market. We're not getting anywhere close. The demand continues to grow every year. We're only getting about somewhere between 18 and 20% of the population that are going into these value-added programs. So the trend is they get more valuable every year, and we're not making that many more of them.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and we really appreciate you joining us. I'd give you a round of applause, but you'd only hear me and not anybody else. But
well, save it for when it matters.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, and we appreciate it and wish you the best.
Thank you.
All right.